welcome to Novara Live. Coming up tonight, Andy Burnham has tightened the rules on early prison releases, preventing serious sex offenders from being freed under the scheme. A Cambridge plagiarism scandal has entered the political mainstream, and former Cabinet Minister Harriet Harman says men should be barred from the next Labour leadership race. I'm Bastani, and tonight I'm very happy to say I'm joined by Michael Walker. Michael, how are you?
Very well. We got some meaty subjects this afternoon, some controversial ones, which is what we always love on this show.
Bit of controversy. Are you going to be a right-wing Michael Walker or woke Michael Walker? Who's going to turn up tonight?
The audience can decide. I'm going to be a bit woker than usual in the first half, and then I'm not sure in the second half.
Okay. There's a nice comment there saying, just put everyone in prison, no more crime. Sometimes I wonder if that's Michael Walker's position. Before we get started on tonight's show, tickets have just gone on sale for our next Downstream IRL event. It'll see Ash Sarkar sit down with cultural theorist Catherine Liu to discuss her latest book, Traumatised, The New Politics of Public Suffering. Fantastic writer with a lot to say. In it, Liu argues that as class politics has declined in the public consciousness, the language of psychology has stepped in to explain problems that are fundamentally rooted in capitalism. And to kick things off, I'll be speaking to Darren McGarvey, author of The Trauma Industrial Complex. That event will be on the 21st of September at the Earth Theatre in Hackney. Tickets are available from the link in the description below. It's going to be so much fun, and dare I say, the weather should still be rather nice towards the end of September, so I hope to see you there. Prisons in Britain are at breaking point. That's hardly news. You've heard that exact line for years. So why are we talking about it tonight? Because prisoners are being released early. Of course, that's not new, because when Labour came into office following the general election in 2024, Shabana Mahmood as Home Secretary and Keir Starmer as PM adopted an unpopular, but most would say necessary policy. They started letting offenders leave prison early, something which started under the previous Tory government, but which was now amped up. They significantly expanded it. Why did they do that? Well, because of historic overcrowding in the prison estate across England and Wales, with, at some points, just 100 places available nationally. And of course, that meant that courts were avoiding custodial sentences where possible, even if it was felt they were deserved. Meanwhile, the Crown Prosecution Service, some argue, stopped prosecuting certain cases, and the police wouldn't bother to make certain arrests. Of course, that's speculation. In short, the criminal justice system stopped working because of prison overcrowding. It had short-circuited the entire system, and a short-term fix was to release those prisoners who had served a considerable portion of their sentence and were now deemed to be low risk. Shabana Mahmood moved the automatic release point for most standard sentences from 50 to 40% of the sentence served, meaning if you'd been sentenced to 2 years in prison, you can now leave after 9 months rather than 12. It's important to say that offenders serving 4 years or more for violent offences, as well as sex offenders and domestic abuse-connected crimes, were excluded. As a result, between September 2024 and June 2025, nearly 40,000 prisoners were released under this legislation. They served less time than they otherwise would have. That was a figure rising to 50,000 by the middle of this year. Now, release is on licence. It's supervised by probation, subject to curfews and tagging, and recallable for breach. They aren't just let out to the wild and so long. But of course, this didn't solve the problem. So further changes were made at the start of this year, with the release date dropped again to roughly 1/3 of the sentence under a new earned progression model. So basically, you'd serve 1/3 of a sentence, providing you met certain conditions. We've gone from 50% to 40% to 30%. Regarding longer sentences for violent or sexual offences previously reached at the 2/3 point, the earliest release point now moved to 50%. So most crimes down to 30% of the sentence, but these serious crimes now at 50%. And it was that which proved hugely controversial, and as a result was paused for review after the Victims Commissioner and the Domestic Abuse Commissioner wrote to government ministers in July. That also came after a number of high-profile cases, including when it became clear that 2 of the 3 men convicted in connection with the killing of PC Andrew Harper were found to be eligible. But the government's defence was clear. Without the Act, courts risked grinding to a halt because there was no space to hold people awaiting trial. Essentially, The argument was around early release under licensed supervision or systemic collapse. Hardly the best choice, is it? Here's Justice Secretary Alex Norris on the Today programme.
Now, the impact of that, and do you recognise this, is that some potentially very dangerous people will be released, including domestic abusers.
Well, you know that people are in prison for a reason, and that's because their behaviour has been judged so dangerous that they have to lose their liberty. That is why the next stage of this process is so important. Those individuals are going to live under very significant control over their freedoms. Yes, they won't be in the prison setting, but some of them can be in approved premises, very, very, very significant controls on lives. But all of them, there's a presumption on tagging for the first time. Beyond that, there'll be drugs and alcohol controls. There will be restrictions on what public events.
I'm hearing you,
places.
Secretary of State, forgive me for the second time saying there'll be serious restrictions, but a National Audit Office report revealed that nearly 9,000 offenders in England and Wales who should have been wearing electronic monitoring tags were unmonitored. So are you actually convinced that these will be tough monitoring? Because it hasn't been in the past, has it?
Well, I am, Nick. I'm very aware of the kind of history in this space. Tagging is important. It's not the only thing, but I think a very important kind of fundamental of controls on behaviour. So, I appreciate, again, having had some of the conversations that I've had in recent days, the burden of proof will be on us to demonstrate that works. For me, it starts, and in the circumstances of Baby Maya and family members talking there, they want to have that conversation with someone who can tell them exactly what will happen next and what will happen with regards to controls on those individuals.
I mean, people are saying that it's going to take time to build new prisons. It costs money. It should be added. 5,000 new prison places are being built as we speak. But so much is apparently happening to these people that are being released with the tagging and various stipulations that you wonder maybe that's costing even more. Michael, tagging also has a very potted history in this country, not least because it's outsourced. It's often the purview of Serco. And I think many people, quite rightly, would say, well, look, you're letting people out of prison and you're saying it's justified because it's going to help us, basically keep the system ticking over. Okay, I buy that argument. However, I don't believe that Serco administering tags is a worthy substitute. Where do you sit on this whole debate?
I suppose there's two issues, isn't there? There's one that's about state capacity, and I think the argument that you're letting people out of prison because you failed to plan to have enough prison places is not a strong one, right? Because if people already have lost faith in politics and they say, okay, so you're doing a policy which you think is a bad idea, but you're only doing it because you didn't plan, that doesn't fill people with confidence. I think your point about parole and how poor that is at the moment is also true. This is not the kind of environment you want to send people out of prison into. At the same time, it's also a nightmare inside prison. So there's lots of bad options here. I do think that one thing I've been looking up more since the last time we discussed this is that Britain is actually quite out of the ordinary compared to the rest of Western Europe in the amount of people that we do lock up. And that is in part because since the early 90s, we have been giving people ever longer minimum terms for particular crimes, mainly because of public outcries. So there is an extent to which public opinion has been leading our judicial policy, and that probably does mean that there are people who are spending more time in prison than they need to. So if you compare us to the Western European average, we put 140 to 146%, no, we don't put that many people in prison, don't worry. 140 to 146 per 100,000 people are in prison in the UK.
In England and Wales, I presume.
In England and Wales,
yeah.
Good correction. In the Western European average is 83 out of 100,000. In Germany, it's 67 out of 100,000. In the Netherlands, it's 65 out of 100,000. So I suppose one thing I find frustrating and that I'm often not particularly convinced by is people whose initial reaction to everything is policing's not the answer, prison's not the answer. And it's I don't really understand why that's a progressive position, because it is really important to get dangerous people off the streets, right? It is really important to have a functional society which everyone can contribute to and people of all classes can feel safe in, especially working class people. If you've got high levels of crime, they're the people who suffer the most. So the position of being relaxed about crime, being associated with the left, I think is bad. But I do think there is something about England and Wales compared to, very moderate social democracies in Europe, whereby
Germany arguably isn't even a social democracy anymore.
Yeah, whereby we seem to be imprisoning people. It's so from reading about this, it's not so much that we put more people into prison than other countries. It's we make them stay there longer, and that's in particular because of these minimum terms. And how a minimum term works is it's in legislation, so the judge doesn't have much sort of ability to use their own judgment. Because
So give me an example of a minimum term where somebody's staying in prison for a significant period of time in a manner that isn't really reflected in places like Germany, the Netherlands.
I mean, I can't give you that off the top of my head.
What crimes are we talking about?
So I think we are talking about sort of violent crime. I think there is a minimum term if you've been caught 3 times of supplying drugs, and it's 7 years. There are a number of them, I think, where if you've been tried a set number of times, then you do a minimum term, which sounds very reasonable on the face of it. But you do have to look at what works. And it does seem like we are putting more people into prison than we need to, compared to many other very similar countries. So and also, you know, David Gork did this review. Now, he's not a lefty, right? He's a conservative politician. And his whole review, the whole point of it was we should do more of this outside of prison. We should have more people who were tagged in the community who are seeing their parole officer more often. So, and I think the way that we're having this debate at the moment in the media is sort of the same immediate drive to emotion that has led us into like not the best place. So it's a very emotionally charged conversation about how dare this person get out, how dare that person get out. And what that ends up with is this constant ratcheting effect where political parties are competing over who would be tougher on people in prison, right? And we're seeing this immediately because the Conservatives, Labour have adopted essentially a conservative policy, and now the Conservatives see it as politically expedient to attack it as too liberal.
We'll talk about that more in a moment. I mean, you've kind of stolen my thunder there, Michael, because we're about to go to it. It doesn't matter. I think where the right are really desperately wrong on this is the fact that we clearly have the highest rates per 1,000 people of people in prison in Western Europe, like you say. We also have some of the highest rates of recidivism. So the idea that it's stopping people from reoffending is just plainly not correct.
Well, it stops the one thing prison 100% does, which no one can disagree with, and which is important, is you can't reoffend while you're in prison. So like, that matters, right? That can't be the only thing that matters. Otherwise, you just lock everyone up and throw away the key. But it is important that people are taken off the streets if they are dangerous.
Well, given we're talking about people being let out early, and that's probably why people are so upset. Speaking of Conservatives, earlier today, Tory leader Kemi Badenoch had this to say.
Labour have been too slow to do this. Andy Burnham has been too slow. I put an amendment down on legislation to stop the release of rapists and paedophiles. Labour MPs voted against it. They're only doing this now because of the pressure which I and others, Conservatives and others, have been putting on them, and we will continue to do so. We do not want to see the early release of killers. I'm glad that the government wants to stop the release of rapists, but they need to get on with it, not just talk about it.
The balls on these people. The balls, the brass balls. The reason why we're having this happen is because over 13 years, the Conservative Party basically didn't build any new prison capacity. Some was in the process of being built when they got, booted out of government in 2024. So some was being built, you have to be fair, but nothing had been completed. And so they kept on putting more people in prison, but not building more prison places. Guess what happens? The prison estate gets full. And the prison estate gets full, like we said at the top of this story. You have less than 100 spare beds at any one time. The system is literally going to collapse. And what that means is that the CPS don't prosecute because they say, well, look, there's no prison places. There's no point prosecuting a relatively minor crime. The judges say, well, you probably should have 2 years on the side, but I'm going to give you 2 months because we need to keep space free in prisons. So the entire system was screwed by this short circuit. Now, I don't think long-term a solution to crime in this country is just build infinity prisons. But where we are right now and where we were in 2024, I think you need to build more capacity. By the way, lots of these prisons are relics from the 19th century. They need to be rebuilt anyway. Okay? So the Tories are to blame for so much of this. They piloted something which Labour have now expanded. So they started the actual policy itself. So they created the problem. They created the proto policy, which has since been adopted by Keir Starmer and now Andy Burnham. And Kemi Badenoch, who's the Tory party leader and was a minister in the Conservative governments responsible for all of this, is saying, actually, this is bad. We have to stop it. It's Punch and Judy. It's ridiculous. And look, I can't for the life of me understand why somebody would vote for the Conservatives. People that watch and listen to this show regularly know I'm not some cheerleader for Labour. I certainly don't want Reform to be the next government. Nigel Farage measuring the curtains at number 10. But voting for Reform is at least somewhat coherent. They've never been in before. If somebody says, well, let's try something new, okay, they're new. I don't agree with it. I don't think that's a reason to choose a government. They're new. So is Count Binface. You want him to be the PM? But it's internally coherent. But you have people who genuinely seem to think they're tough on law and order and they want a return of the party that didn't build new prison capacity for 13 years and effectively put us on the step of collapsing the entire criminal justice system in this country. And on tags, David Gork is saying that we need to have more tagging and more care in the community. They privatised all of it. They privatised the probation service after 2010. They privatised the outsourced tagging with Serco, repeatedly fails. They wanted to privatise vast swathes of the police. They did. They actually did with some back office operations. They privatised army recruitment, these people. They're crazy. And then they say, why does the system not work? We need more community and there is no community. You destroyed it. You want us to become a shareholder-led economic zone, not a community, not a country. So by all means, bash Labour. They've been in for 2 years, by the way. They could have done better than this by now, I think. Maybe Michael disagrees. We'll talk about that more in a moment. But the brass balls on Kemi. The mother of Andrew Harper, who was, of course, killed, Debbie Adlam, told the BBC what it meant to her that her son's killers were now eligible for early release.
Pretty much that they have to be released because of the prison system failing, etc., which, quite frankly, we shouldn't be in this situation. That the rapists and paedophiles and grooming gangs are not going to be eligible for early release, which is completely right. And I am happy about that because I think, these are extremely dangerous people. But they shouldn't have been considered, quite honestly. They shouldn't have been considered in the first place for early release. I mean, what sort of society are we going to be living in if that's the standards we're keeping? So nothing's going to happen before October, no releases at all until October. So, we've got a few weeks to just try and get our heads around what we need to know. We need to put some thought into it because it's still very early for us to actually find this out. We don't know where this is going to lead us emotionally yet, so we've got to really see what happens.
Andy Burnham, the new Prime Minister, has given his justification for keeping the scheme mostly intact. He posted this on X. The truth is, I wanted to go even further. I know there will be concerns about who will still be released early for other offences. I've pushed the very limits of what it is possible to do. I know I can look people in the eye and say to them, there is nothing more I could have asked for without risking the prison system reaching capacity and collapsing within months. I mean, from everything I've read and listened to and watched, that seems to be nail on head, Michael. I suppose one thing you could say is that it's been more than 2 years, slightly over 2 years since they won the general election. There could have been more immediate action to expand prison capacity. That might have been upgrading Category C to Category B or D to C, or just building Nightingale prisons, that people have referred to them as. That's a lot harder than it sounds. Prisons need to be much more secure than hospitals. What's your take in terms of what Labour could have done in the last 2 years?
Well, I think what that interview shows you, again, is what I said before, which is saying we're going to let this person out who did this harm to your family because the prisons have run out of space is a terrible argument to make that's obviously going to upset people, right? Because the very framing of it is saying that justice isn't being done, even on the terms that the state has set down. So I can see why that offends people. At the same time, I do think it is a danger to completely ignore the idea that seems convincing that we do incarcerate too many people. And even, I haven't really heard this mentioned before, but when the killing of PC Harper was horrible, was horrific. But the people who might get early release were passengers in the car.
It was joint enterprise, yeah.
Right, so I'm not saying they're innocent, but and they'll have got 7 years in prison. So they'll have been in prison for 7 years for being in the passenger seat of a car that killed someone in a brutal way.
Yeah, but he was dragged for a long period of time and they did nothing to stop it, right?
Yes. So
it's one of those instances where, cause often joint enterprise can be actually a little bit harsh. This doesn't seem to be one of those incidents.
Well, it's the same as most joint enterprise, I think. But
joint enterprise, you might be in the same sort of, space when somebody does something very bad and you're charged together. It can often be racialized or it can be, anti-working class kind of application of the law, whereas they were inside a car that was moving and dragging somebody behind it for a very long period of time, and that person died.
But presumably their motives were to desperately get away, right? So it was a callousness, not a desire to kill people. So do we know, should all three of them be in prison for more than 13 years? I don't really know. And would we have avoided this controversy if the judge in the first place had been able to give them 7 years instead of 13, right? And the fact that these guys, they're going to get out. They're not just going to be free to continue their life as usual. As you say, yeah, it's a shame our parole system is outsourced. It shouldn't be. But they will be tagged. There should be sort of frequent contact between them and parole officers. So to me, it doesn't seem like an ideal justice system should not have the possibility of those guys getting out after 7 years. Not the driver, but the passengers, right? And also, I do think
by the way, he is not up for early release.
And the reason why we have this ratchet effect, I think, is because obviously, if you are a family member of someone who has been killed in horrific circumstances, your emotions are telling you kind of do want them, locked up with the key thrown away. And we have this constant dialogue between politicians and people who have suffered very rare tragedies and forming the law on the basis of, very sympathetic. I have, complete sympathy for P.C. Harper's mother, right? He seemed, it's a completely tragic death. He was bravely doing his job, right? If you have any relationship to him whatsoever, you were going to be distraught and also furious. And especially furious that the people who, you thought justice had been done to are now being let out, because prisons have been filled up. It obviously seems lucky that they've got lucky, right? Because they've got out earlier than they otherwise would have done. But if the judge had said, I think this probably warrants 7 years. It's not clear they're going to be a danger to society for their whole life. They've been callous and irresponsible. There's not really any evidence they wanted to kill someone. I would like.
There's no evidence that anybody wants to kill someone. Yeah, so that's why it was manslaughter, not murder.
Yeah, which makes it seem like, is 7 years kind of not enough? It just seems like that's a question that hasn't really been asked in all of the coverage of this because obviously
he's a police officer, right?
Well, because he's a police officer, but also because the debate is, should we let prisoners out because prisons are full? The debate isn't, how long should we actually send people to prison for? How long is it useful to send people to prison for particular crimes? And potentially there are some crimes where people don't get sent for long enough. And there are, I think, probably many crimes where people get sent to prison for longer than they need to be sent. And that's not the conversation we're having, because we're having the conversation that constantly happens in the political mainstream, whether Labour or Tories are in power, which is sort of, you need to punish this person. This is an outraged victim or family of victim. And then you have a ratcheting up effect because it's sort of politically really difficult to lower the time that people go to prison, which again is probably why, so lots of these sort of European countries where you have fewer people in prison, they're proportional representation, right? So you can have, or at least historically, you've been able to have policy making, which is a bit less zero sum, right? So instead of it being here, when the Labour are in opposition, they attack the Tories for being too weak. When Tories are in opposition, they attack Labour for being too weak, right? It's constantly this ratcheting effect. If you have, a grand coalition where the Social Democrats and the Christian Democrats in Germany are both in power, they can say, okay, well, the prisons are filling up. It's not actually particularly beneficial to anyone to send these people to prison for 10 to 15 years, long after they're a danger to anyone. So shall we just agree to depoliticize this issue and let them out after 7? And that to me seems like probably a more rational way of doing policy. So I'm concerned about the way this narrative is being driven. I think Andy Burnham, as a politician, is dealing with it exactly right. You have to choose your battles when you're a prime minister, especially when you're a Labour prime minister. If I was him, this isn't a battle I'd choose right now. But I think in a more rational society, our debate might look quite different.
Another win for PR, by the way. I totally agree with you. We'd have a much more sensible criminal justice system in this country. I think much more effective outcomes if we had PR and not first past the post. Another reason to have PR, which I think generally speaking, everybody here at Novara Media agrees on. Has Michael ever done anything illegal in his life? I'll let you answer that, but yes.
Yes.
And then similarly, has Michael ever been to a protest? The two questions are related. Have you done anything illegal in your life?
I blocked a plane from taking off in protest at the expansion of Stansted Airport with Plane Stupid.
That would be terrorism now.
When I was 18,
probably.
that would be terrorism now. At the time, it was aggravated trespass. So that's the only crime I've been charged and convicted for. I
Michael-
won't admit to any others.
Michael walks the walk, folks. And look, I've been found guilty of violent disorder on a protest. So we both have some.
Also, the comments are still making out that I'm making some right-wing argument. I'm saying send less people to prison.
Michael's the woke
I'm
guy right now.
I'm on your side right now. What's going on?
He's your guy. I have personally experienced the outsourcing of the probation service, having served 200 hours plus of probation after 2011. And I saw what a complete waste of time and resource it was for everybody.
I did 50 hours of community service. I thought it was quite interesting.
Yeah, but, you know, this is I got involved just after it was outsourced. And I remember talking to the two guys who were the probation officers, two Jamaican guys. I mean, they were born in Jamaica. They had Jamaican accents, but they've been here for a very long time. One of them was actually much older. And I talked to them about this stuff at length, and they were just like, the whole thing is screwed. Very, very interesting experience. 200 hours, a little bit long. In February 2023, Cambridge University made an academic appointment that generated glowing headlines. Jason Arday, a 37-year-old academic, was appointed Professor of Sociology of Education, making him the youngest ever black scholar to hold a professorial post at the university. In a BBC interview shortly after his appointment, Arday was asked about how the new job tied into his work in education.
In many respects, it's a continuation of my overall mission, which is to democratise and find a way to redistribute the resources sector-wide to the most disadvantaged. And that becomes hugely integral to, has always been integral to my mission. And whilst getting this post is significant, I guess, from the history aspect, in a really important way, and I think it's very important to caveat this, there isn't a sense of enjoyment one can take from knowing that when you stand upon this vista and you look towards your left and your right, your peers are absent. And so in that regard, there is no joy to be taken from that. The solace that one would take from that kind of situation is that actually I'm going to focus even more so now and use the platform and the privilege that I've been given to really find a way to redistribute those resources and really continue the work that I've been fortunate enough to do for the last 10 years.
Some very noble, laudable aims there. But Arday now finds himself at the centre of a scandal, with questions swirling around the quality of his academic scholarship, as well as the veracity of certain biographical claims the young professor has made in the past. Now, we have to be clear. The original accusations against Arday were made by individuals who may have their own agendas. And Nathan Kofnas is a philosopher who has been explicit that he's on a mission to end the tyranny of what he calls wokeism, by popularising the view that intelligence, as well as other traits, are largely hereditary, and that talents are not equally distributed across ethnic groups. It's a view he calls race realism. In 2024, his research position at Emmanuel College, Cambridge, was terminated after he wrote, amongst other things, that based on a pure meritocracy, quote, blacks would disappear from almost all high-profile positions outside of sports and entertainment. Disgusting thing to say. The University of Cambridge ruled later on that his speech was lawful. But last month, Kofnas publicly accused Arday of plagiarising large parts of his PhD thesis, earned at Liverpool John Moores University in 2015, after he ran it through a piece of plagiarism detection software. And analysis by The Times appears to back Kofnas up, with more than 100 passages found in his PhD that were similar to the work of another researcher. The Times writes this. Analysis by The Times of Arday's thesis from 2015 on the subject of peer mentoring among student teachers found multiple examples of identical or near-identical passages to the doctoral thesis of Paula Zwodziak-Myers, a Brunel University student published 6 years earlier. Zwodziak-Myers is mentioned 17 times in Arday's thesis, as are dozens of other academics in 45 pages of references. The row revolves around whether Arday should have cited her every time he paraphrased or recycled her work. Nathan Kofnas, who published this week's blog post, claimed that Arday had relied heavily on Zwodziak-Myers for key ideas and arguments. In an interview with The Times on Friday, Arday addressed questions around his scholarship, saying this: "It's soul-destroying because I've done everything I can to try and do the best I can. And I'm not saying that I'm perfect, and I never try to present this fairy tale narrative that I am. I don't think people realise that there's a human being at the end of this, and they don't realise that the human being is someone's father or a son. I'm accountable for the mistakes I've made. I hold myself accountable, and other people should hold me accountable. We're talking about academia here. I didn't murder somebody. I think the cruelty that I've experienced and the positioning of me as this kind of liar and fantasist is totally unacceptable." The question of plagiarism was also subject to a review by an academic misconduct panel at Liverpool John Moores after complaints about possible plagiarism were received last year. That panel cleared Ardé, and on Times Radio, Nels Abbey, who has signed a letter in defence of Ardé, stood up for the academic.
Why is it that every single movement or every single step towards Black liberation or equality or reconstruction is rapidly destroyed or is rapidly lampooned or is rapidly torn down? I pose that question to you because I come here this morning seeking answers as much as I seek to answer.
Okay, well, I will give you a response that I think you are right to suggest, and I think other people are right to suggest, that people have got it in for Jason Ardé. I also think he has questions to answer about the near duplication of other people's work that has appeared in his work, and that both those things can be true at once.
Well, but I don't think that answers my question, because I think there's a more broader situation happening here. Today it's Jason Ardé. Last month it was Miss Harriet. Months ago it was somebody. It's always a pipe, and I've seen this time and time and time again.
So are you saying that Black people are held to a higher standard than their white counterparts?
I say Black people, not just all Black people, I was clear. Black people who harbour a desire to actually improve the outcomes of life, life outcomes and the quality of life for Black people. Black people genuinely love Black people. They often find themselves at the being torn down very, very significantly. The way that, say, I don't know, people who harbour what I would describe as clear-cut white supremacist tendencies are not torn down at all.
Ardé, whose autobiography is published later this month, has been celebrated for his academic achievements. He's the author of over a dozen peer-reviewed articles, the sole author of 3 books, and has written several chapters in edited volumes. No doubt, they'll also be subject to significant scrutiny as well. All of that is despite coming from a very difficult background. This is from Cambridge University's website. Ardé has faced many personal challenges, notably being diagnosed at the age of 3 with a form of autism spectrum disorder, which meant he was unable to speak until he was 11 or to read or write until he was 18. Therapists and career advisors predicted he would spend his adult life in assisted living and require lifelong support. Instead, through personal determination and the support of family and close friends, he went to college, trained as a teacher, and then launched his academic career. Ardé's interests haven't only been academic, he's also been a keen charity fundraiser. But in a piece published over the weekend, The Guardian raised questions about some claims he's made on that front too. This is from that article. He has claimed in media interviews to have raised £5 million for charities over a 20-year period. Sometimes this figure has risen to 5.5 million. He's done this, he says, by running 30 marathons in 35 days, a feat he has spoken about in media interviews and in his book. He also claimed at public events to have run 600 miles in 6 days. When asked if the £5 million figure was accurate, Ardé clarified to The Guardian that the money was raised with the help of, quote, many fundraising collectives over a 2-decade period. When asked to identify other people who took part in these efforts, Ardé said he had signed NDAs preventing him from disclosing that information. The 30 marathons over 30 days was also put to Ardé. The Guardian also asked Ardé about his claim to run 600 miles in 6 days, an achievement that would make him one of the world's most gifted endurance runners. The first woman to achieve the feat, Megan Eckert, only managed it last year. The men's record is 650 miles. He said that's because of the, quote, cumulative wear and tear of training from his previous running challenges. He, quote, had to put rest days in between the running days just to finish the 600-mile challenge, which was actually completed over a 12-day period. Asked by The Times why he didn't correct the record, Ardé said this: "Could I have ever guessed that somebody would literally comb through every single word I've ever said on that? There's no way, because I never ever guessed I'd ever be in this position." Ardé has been subject to racist emails and abuse from the moment he began his job at Cambridge. But The Guardian has also investigated allegations he made of very severe racial harassment, reporting this. In an open letter to the Government Minister Jackie Smith in July 2025, which outlined Ardé's experiences, he claimed to have been, quote, threatened with a knife, physically assaulted and spat on, had rape and death threats being made to him and his family, bananas and bullets being posted to him via the university campus, and corrosive substances and mutilated animals sent to his family home. The report goes on to say this: Ardé confirmed in an interview with The Guardian that, quote, the mutilated animal sent to his family home mentioned in the open letter was a severed pig's head, delivered in a large cardboard box to his parents' home address in South London. He claimed to have intercepted the package and immediately thrown it away, only telling the police several months later. In a subsequent interview, he claimed the police investigated, checking with butchers in South London if they'd sold a pig, eventually finding one that had sold, quote, a whole hog on the morning the head was left outside the family home. When The Guardian checked those details with the local butchers Ardé named, they said no police officer had come in to ask them about a pig. When asked if they were sure, the butcher said, quote, "That's the kind of thing we'd remember." When the details Ardé gave about the pig's head investigation were checked by London's Metropolitan Police, The Guardian was told they were categorically incorrect and no investigation had taken place. When The Guardian asked Ardé about the claims, it reports that he stood by them, saying that dishonesty would have jeopardised his career. Adding this, "To be honest with you, I thought you'd just believe me. Why would I lie?" Now, there's a lot to talk about here, but there's one article in The Telegraph that really misses the point. According to Celia Walden, in her days at Cambridge, Jason Ardé's claims wouldn't have lasted 5 minutes because of their zero-tolerance approach to plagiarism. Well, Walden was born in 1975, meaning that when she was at Cambridge in the early 90s, plagiarism went largely undetected because there wasn't the technology to catch it. As a result, academics with an agenda found it much harder to weaponise what has always been a fairly common crime. And unlike in the case of the allegations against Ardé, the antidote when it's found in published work is generally a quiet correction, not a public hounding. Michael, I'm going to go to a comment before I come to you because it's very, very useful. I'm going to read it out, and it's something I actually agree with. That's why we're going to it straight off the bat. This is from @Chloe Guzman93. I can tell you that 6% of his PhD was classed as plagiarised. Liverpool John Moores University had reassessed it. The biographical claims, yes, but the PhD he earned, my dad literally was his tutor. From what I've read, I've not read the PhD. From what I've read, it seems like it was probably just bad referencing. In the Viva, you get some corrections. You should probably be told to go away and do the formatting correctly. But I don't think it's plagiarism with intent to plagiarise. The person whose PhD is at stake here is referenced elsewhere, repeatedly in the PhD. So I think it's probably just bad formatting, bad referencing. I buy that. I think they bought it. However, on the biographical claims, that stuff does seem rather outlandish, doesn't it?
Yes. I mean, lots of it doesn't sound true. So if you've been sort of threatened with a knife at your place of work, but you don't tell anyone and you just continue with your day, and then sort of, it's obviously not something you take casually because then it becomes a story that you sort of use in interviews or books or whatever. The pig one, I mean, there's no pictures of the pig. So he sort of apparently just put it in a bin. And then the story involving the butchers has fallen apart. And obviously I see why. When this started happening, there was a big open letter defending this guy, sort of saying this is all a smear campaign, prestigious people signing it. And I can see why that happens, because there is a campaign against this guy, in part because of his race, and much of it's very unpleasant. At the same time, he does seem like he has a lot of questions to answer. If I'm honest, I have no real independent way of saying how much plagiarism is normal in an academic work. Like I'm not an academic. It would be interesting to see if you chose, if you just sort of looked through the Cambridge faculty at random and chose them and put all of their work through this technology which shows what is stolen from other people's work, if it would be similar to this guy's rate. You need something to compare it to. And at the moment, I don't have that. I think what's more convincing to me than the plagiarism stuff is that, so he's a qualitative researcher, so it's all based on sort of interviews. Some of it's autoethnography, so it's based on his own experiences. And it does seem like in the interviews, people who he is supposed to have spoken to and their quotes sort of appear across different papers under slightly different identities. So it doesn't seem like this was...
You should anonymise that data, generally speaking. As an ethical point, you should generally anonymise.
No, but it's not about names. It's about giving them different characteristics. Right. It's because are they an academic or are they a student? So right. On one paper they're a student,
just
on paper
to clarify to people that are watching.
It's not that their names have changed, it's that their characteristics have changed in a sense that undermines whether these were real interviews, right? And as I say, I'm not an expert on this, I'm not an expert on academic standards whatsoever, but there's one issue which is plagiarism, which is have you not attributed properly, and then there's the other issue which is, closer to academic fraud, which is are the interviews you are citing real interviews? Or are you sort of using or recycling or regurgitating different comments from different people in different places whether or not they actually happened. There is also some sloppiness. There's a rogue apostrophe in the title of his PhD, which is a bit...
But again, that's something for people who aren't familiar with this. You do your PhD, you submit the PhD, then a few months later you have a Viva, you have somebody from inside your institution, you have an external examiner, and they would do corrections, right? So, and if there's no corrections, you get no corrections. Fabulous, you've done amazing, great.
But is it not
very
the case...
unusual? Or you get corrections, and they might be, actually, this chapter doesn't make much sense. Your hypothesis isn't very good, or whatever. Change these things, and then we'll pass you later on, and that can include grammatical problems.
But the question isn't whether this guy should have got a PhD.
And that's down to the... By the way, that's down to the examiner, it's not him.
But the question isn't, should this guy have got a PhD? The question is, should he have been given this very prestigious professorship, right? And if you are a professor... If you've been promoted to professor, one would expect that your academic standards are reasonably high without, having to be constantly supervised so that you do it right? And he sort of said, I couldn't afford a proofreader, et cetera, et cetera.
Hold on, but that's not his problem, right? So let's say he's gone to submit a PhD and the examiners, for whatever reason, haven't told him to make the corrections that you just identified, right? Which obviously, that sounds outlandish, right? The title didn't have the apostrophe in the right place. But that's not his fault. I'm sure that happens quite a lot, right?
Well, it's not his fault.
A lot of PhD students, they might be they might be too liked, but they might know the external examiner, and they let them off the hook with a ton of things. So that happens all the time, I'm sure, and it works the other way as well. People are mistreated for ill in the Viva, but that's not his fault. And then he gets offered a job because he's seen as for the institution, he's probably seen as a really credible, voice in the field. He's young. They're trying to say something about their institution within a certain sort of political moment. He's a good public speaker. So you might say it was a political appointment or not, or they're trying to overcome very real deficits in their institution, like a lack of representation among minority communities. These are all very real things. But again, that's not his fault. So you might say that he's just a mediocre academic who wasn't corrected properly, and then he's over-promoted. But I don't see why that's... We can talk about the biography stuff in a minute, because I think that is really weird. Well, that's not on him. That says more about the institutions and academia, doesn't it?
Yeah. I'm not interested in laying blame here. I'm not morally outraged that someone's academic work might have been a bit shoddy on first draft. That's nothing to do with me. But the point that's being made, and which someone like Nathan Coffness will be very pleased, sort of many people are reading from this, is that it does look like someone got promoted to a very prestigious position when their work was a bit sloppy. And when people tried to write about this before, so there was an article in the Times Higher Education Review. Oh, I can't remember, is it just called Times Higher Education, I think, isn't it? So they were going to publish an article about his work and sort of the sloppiness involved. And I think with the interviews, it's maybe more than sloppiness. And then he enlisted Carter Ruck to threaten them for defamation, which is a very sort of aggressive law firm. And it was spiked.
Not cheap.
Not cheap. So... I'm not sure this is a guy that people should be closing ranks around, essentially. But I also feel like, he's being attacked left, right, and centre in public, and I'm not, particularly keen to join in because it's unpleasant, right? He built up this career. Now people have noticed that it doesn't all quite add up. And the whole edifice is crumbling. And for him, I just feel sorry for him, right? Maybe he made up some stuff. I think, to be honest, if you make up stuff about hate crimes, that's actually not, I think that's quite a despicable thing to do in a way. Because one, you're instilling fear in people, really important issue that you're making light of. If as my interpretation of some of these articles are, they didn't seem like they actually happened, that is...
Well, some stuff did happen, and then other stuff didn't happen,
that's very morally wrong to me. But you're right, the issue about the sloppy work and getting the position, and then Cambridge closing ranks. That's more about Cambridge than it is about Jason Arday. But I think the point that many of the right-wing critics are trying to make is about Cambridge. They're saying that standards have fallen in academia, in part because after the BLM movement, they realized, oh my God, we don't have enough faculty from particular backgrounds. Let's do a really rush job of trying to promote some people. And actually this is having a negative effect on everyone, because there is an argument made by people like Nathan Coffness that you can only promote people to professorships from black backgrounds if you lower standards. And obviously I don't think that's true. But if you want an example of where it looks like maybe the standards were lower, this would be it. So they should have looked much harder and got a black professor whose job was his work was less sloppy, because, the consequences of this aren't really going to be good for anyone.
They went for a vibe, right? Young, dynamic.
I think so.
Media engagement, media savvy.
Great story.
Great story, very marketable.
And that's why the biography matters as well, because one of the reasons that he got this star professorship was because he had such a story, and now parts of the story, on second reading, don't seem entirely credible.
But don't you think there's 2 points here, and we'll go to our next story. And you might be thinking, why are we talking about this? I think it's so important to talk about this story, not because of who this guy is, but what it says, A, about higher education, but B, also, I think there's a bit of a myth around meritocracy. So this idea that, universities were always meritocratic, and now they're not, and now a certain, set of people benefit from the lack of meritocracy. Whereas, I was talking about this with our great colleague earlier on, Stephen. There wasn't meritocracy in the past, and we've basically swapped one form of opposition to meritocracy for another. These people basically say that there are a bunch of people who shouldn't be in these institutions. They're not good enough to be there because of X, Y, Z. You would have made the same argument 40 years ago. A bunch of people who've gone to public schools who fundamentally shouldn't be at Oxford or Cambridge, like Prince Charles, or King Charles, he's now called. I think he went to Cambridge on God knows what A-levels, but, that's how it worked. King, soon to be King William, went to St Andrews. From everything I've been told by people who've met him, he's not the smartest chap. But anyway, this idea that meritocracy determines what these institutions look like isn't true, but we only talk about it in the media, or we only hear about it in the media when it's about a black guy. I mean, that seems to me quite fair.
Yeah, there's definitely a large amount of truth to it. There are right-wing people that got hounded out of universities as well. I think in general, universities, especially in many humanities departments, and especially in sort of something like education studies, they are very, very left-wing spaces. And I think actually they probably would benefit from a bit more intellectual diversity. Jonathan Haidt makes a great point about this in his book, The Coddling of the American Mind, where he's sort of looking at the polling of what way academics vote in various departments in various universities. And some of it's like 97% Democrat or whatever. And it's not just sort of like equal opportunities. Oh, Republicans should have rights too. It's that if everyone in a discipline kind of agrees with each other, then they're not going to hold their feet to the fire in the same way that you would like to. That's why I like going on like right-wing shows or debating like prison abolitionists, because sort of like having debates makes you sharpen your arguments a little bit. And I think there are a lot of departments in sociology or education studies like this guy was in, where everyone feels very safe in their kind of blue sky, very hyper left wing, and I do think the standards sometimes aren't incredibly high. And so I think there is some merit to the argument that is made about some of these, I suppose, softer disciplines.
Can I just say something very quickly? Because I've had some experience in these spaces. I actually think the worst, most closed-minded people in academia aren't left-wing. They are hyper-centrist liberals who are coded as left-wing by the right. These are people who were very much stop Brexit. I'm saying, Brexit was a great thing, but they were very much stop Brexit, anti-Jeremy Corbyn, anti-Boris Johnson, vote Lib Dem. And honestly, I can say this as somebody who did undergraduate, master's degree, PhD, the most closed-minded people in academia, bar none. So I agree with you. And by the way, they, in certain disciplines like political science, sociology, less so economics, public policy, those people are everywhere. There's a profusion of them. They vote left. They vote Labour, centre-left, let's say. Often they'll scab on strikes. They won't necessarily think that cleaners should be in-house. They have no problem with them being outsourced. So I question to what extent they're left-wing. But those people are the backbone of academia, 100%. And I would say that right-wing people aren't in academia, not because academia excludes them, but because right-wing people are generally motivated by money. Well, and hold on, and left-wing people, or progressives, these people aren't left-wing, they're liberals, are generally motivated more by status, right? And this is something that a right-winger would say. So if you're right-wing and you believe in a bunch of things and you're really smart, you don't think, I'm going to go do a PhD. You think, I'm going to make a ton of money in the city, because you have different incentives, different worldviews, different things that matter to you. And that's fine, by the way. Different ideas of the good life. So this idea that right-wingers, talented, hyper-talented right-wingers are being kept out of the academy, I just don't think it's true, because by virtue of their political beliefs and their worldview, those people aren't attracted to higher education.
I think it's both. I think left-wing people are more likely to go into the academy, but if you get a department which is already that number people who, if it's 90% of people who all agree with each other politically, then that is going to affect their hiring processes. And we have seen it in various universities where there has been a lecturer or whoever who's had a position which I might not agree with, right, but which is offensive to some people on campus, and then they're subject to protests and they leave. So it's like Kathleen Stock or Eric Kaufman or whatever. Now, people might disagree with them, but they didn't really leave those universities because someone found an academic problem with their work. It was because people found what they were saying distasteful, even though what they were saying was in line with what lots of people in the country believe. And that should all be represented in a university.
We've got a great comment, Michael. And we'll move on from the story in a minute. We've done 2 stories in 55 minutes. Was I abducted by aliens? Where did the time go? At Spin M24, I was doing a master's at Cambridge when Jordan Peterson got a job there. He didn't get remotely close to this scrutiny. It's racism. It's true, Michael.
Didn't he he got his position withdrawn?
He didn't get the scrutiny from the Telegraph or the Times.
But he got his position.
Think he did?
But he got his position withdrawn. Like literally, there was so much scrutiny, he didn't take up the job. I'm pretty sure that's true.
I think both he and the institution determined it probably wasn't worth their while. But the point
because loads of people were pushing back.
Michael, the point is this: the right say that qualitative research methods aren't real. Sociology is not a real subject. Okay, autoethnography isn't a real research approach. I think it is. It can be done very badly, but it can also be done very well. And then the same people championing Jordan Peterson as this kind of emblem of Western civilization and research methods. It's crazy. But you're describing the guy.
No, but you disagree with the people who write at the Telegraph. Great, that's fine. And you disagree with Jordan Peterson. But Jordan Peterson is literally the worst example to pick here because he was invited to a position at Cambridge University. And then because of all the outrage, mainly because of people finding what he said offensive, his position was withdrawn. And it wasn't really because anyone said he plagiarized anything or done academic fraud. It's because they said they disagreed with his positions. Now, I also disagree with his positions. But if anything, that's an example of right-wing people struggling to get prestigious jobs at universities. Like, I think universities should be a space of great pluralism.
And, I totally agree with that.
And I think Jordan Peterson should have got the job at Cambridge University if they wanted him to have it.
I totally agree with that. You know, you often get blue-collar parents saying that, actually, I don't want my kids to go... By the way, your kids should go to university if they want to go to university. There's a lot to do, a lot to learn, lots of great people to meet. It's a big, wide world. But they say, I don't want them to go there because everybody thinks the same. There's some truth to it, by the way. There's some truth to it, by the way. And I say that as somebody who came from small-town Bournemouth, came to London to go to university, opened my horizons. But often within a certain department or a certain discipline, they can be foreclosed as well. Very bad thing, and at odds with the very ambitions which drive a humanities education. It's about self-cultivation, learning more about both yourself and the world. Harriet Harman was one of the leading figures in Labour during the 2000s. She was also an MP for more than 40 years. She stood down from her South London seat at the last general election. The first ever Minister for Women under Tony Blair and responsible for welfare reform after 1997. Harman was even briefly the leader of the opposition. That came after Ed Miliband lost the 2015 general election. And she was, of course, replaced by Jeremy Corbyn when he was elected to the job that autumn. Today, Harriet Harman is a Labour peer and party grandee, so naturally, she has a podcast. It's called Electoral Dysfunction, which she co-hosts alongside Ruth Davidson and the political editor at Sky News, Beth Rigby. And last week, Harman had this to say on the podcast about the future of the Labour Party leadership.
The only way we'll have a woman leader of the Labour Party next time is if we start a conversation now where we say that actually that men cannot stand for the leadership next time, because if men stand for the leadership next time, we'll have another...
Are you going to have an all-women's list for the next Labour leader? You can't do that.
I think what we need to do is for women's ambition to be encouraged and male ambition to be the next leader of the Labour Party to be discouraged.
Do you think the next leader after Andy Burnham, whoever that may be, has to be a woman then?
Oh, I absolutely think so. And I think I'm going to be asking any really excellent young man MP, you know, rising star in the Labour Party, I'll be wanting to encourage and support them, but I'll be saying to them, are you going to support a woman next time? Or are you going to put yourself in front and put a woman behind you?
I've had enough of this stuff, Michael. Now, to be clear, in 2010, Diane Abbott stood for the leadership of the Labour Party. She's a woman. Harriet Harman didn't back her. In 2020, Rebecca Long Bailey stood for the leadership of the Labour Party. Guess what? Harriet Harman didn't back her. So I think there's a little bit more going on than just the gender of the candidates. Now, whatever your views on that proposal, what you might not know is that it's illegal. That's because of the Equality Act passed in the final days of the Gordon Brown government in 2010. It's the UK's main anti-discrimination law, effectively consolidating a patchwork of earlier legislation like the Sex Discrimination Act and Race Relations Act into a single statute. In short, the law is designed to protect people from discrimination, harassment and victimisation based on 9 protected characteristics, including age, disability, gender reassignment, marriage or civil partnership, pregnancy, maternity, race, religion or belief, sex and sexual orientation. It applies across employment, education, housing and the provision of goods and services and covers several forms of discrimination. All of that sounds welcome, right? But here's where it gets really interesting, at least in the context of Harriet Harman's comments. Because while the relevant carve-out in the Act, Section 104, allows registered political parties to make arrangements, including single-sex shortlists for selecting candidates, the scope for that is explicit. It only applies to selection of candidates for elections to Parliament, local government, the Scottish Parliament and the Welsh Assembly. The legislation text confirms this is tied specifically to a relevant election where the purpose is reducing inequality between the number of a party's elected candidates who share a protected characteristic and those who don't. So all women shortlists for the Labour Party. Seems reasonable, but a leadership election doesn't fit that definition. That's because it's an internal party process for choosing who leads an organisation, not a mechanism for selecting who stands for public office. Leader and deputy leader elections aren't listed amongst the relevant elections that the exemption covers. So the specific legal shield that makes all women shortlists lawful doesn't automatically extend to who can run the Labour Party. And without Section 104 covering it, a leadership election barring men would likely be judged to be discriminatory under the law. It would be illegal. After all, political parties are treated as membership associations under the Act, and excluding members from a benefit or opportunity on the basis of their sex would be discriminatory. Certainly interesting. And more interesting still is that the person who introduced the 2010 Equality Act was, you guessed it, Harriet Harman. She's proposing something which is illegal under the legislation she introduced. Michael, is it possible that Harriet Harman doesn't actually know the law that not only she introduced, but she often says is the greatest achievement in her political career?
I mean, is she proposing it has to be all men, or isn't she just saying she's going to discourage men from standing? Which is presumably a different, if she's saying I'm going to try and make it a bit taboo to stand as a man to be the next leader of the Labour Party because I want the women to step forward. I don't think that would be illegal. It'd be illegal to sort of have in the rule book only, well, it might be, I mean, I don't know the law, quite frankly.
I just said this to you, Michael. I just spent a good couple of minutes telling you the law.
Yeah. Well,
all women shortlists for the Labour Party or the Tory Party or wherever, legal.
But what I mean is,
for the leadership, illegal.
But at the same time, carve-outs get made for different things, don't they? So isn't it always the case that you can't discriminate unless it's for a reasonable cause? So you can't discriminate unless there's a good reason for doing it, which is why you can have like women-only associations, or whatever, right? So and there is a women's equality party. I think you have to be a woman to join it. So clearly you can be a political party that excludes men, and their leader can presumably only be a woman.
I suspect that isn't actually lawful, Michael. No. I suspect they strongly discourage it.
Yeah. But I mean, she's talking about strongly discouraging it anyway, isn't she? She's saying, I will talk to male members of the Labour Party and say, maybe this time don't put yourself forward. I mean, I don't think that's I don't think that's particularly strong politics. I think it's a bit naff. But I'm not sure it's illegal.
What do you think of the politics of it? Because, to be clear, it is illegal to have an all-male or all-female shortlist, exclusively shortlist, or any kind of protected characteristic under the law. It is illegal, and you're saying that she's not saying that. I've heard many times, by the way, people say these things in the Labour Party. The extent of the Equality Act is quite extraordinary. If we are hiring somebody here at Novara Media, and on Slack, I say, we should just hire a woman, that breaches the Equality Act during the hiring process. It's a very serious thing. And I find it really interesting, Michael, that employers around the country have to know this stuff inside out. Otherwise, they're going to get rinsed. By the way, as they should do. You shouldn't be able to discriminate against people on the basis of a special characteristic. I agree with that. But I sincerely think that people like Harriet Harman don't think that those rules should A, apply to them, or B, they don't necessarily know them inside out. And C, I don't think they understand the extent to which they curtail the decisions made by organisations every single day across the country. I really don't think they understand it. I think, at one point she wanted more women in Parliament, and so good. Like I say, I support all women shortlists. And so we had this legislation, and now, because she wants a female leader of the Labour Party, she's kind of saying the opposite thing. She's at least going against the spirit of the laws she's advocated, if not, the letter. I think it's probably both, actually. I find it really strange. And I think it says, again, so much about sort of DEI liberalism. I know you're not much as animating Michael today. Maybe he's on sort of beta blockers like that Lux Max. What's his name?
I think Harry, I struggle.
Are you Lux Maxing, Michael?
No, I'm quite sweaty and need to get back into the gym myself. But so I'm thinking about this. Yeah, I mean, the politics is a bit naff, but it is also kind of crazy that Labour Party still hasn't had a female leader.
Because people like her kept voting against it.
Yeah, there's something to that.
I was a Labour member in 2020. I voted for Rebecca Long-Bailey. Who did you vote for?
I voted for Rebecca Long-Bailey, yeah.
There you go.
So I have voted for a female leader of the Labour Party.
There you go. And somebody like Harriet Harman will say, by the way, it's legit to say, why are two men talking about this? But I voted for a female leader of the Labour Party. You didn't. I'm tired of this. Basically what she's saying is, I want somebody I like to be leader of the Labour Party. I want a woman. Okay, can they be Rebecca Long-Bailey? No. Can they be Zara Sultana? Absolutely not. So what you have is this masquerade where people are talking about equality and, liberation and politics, but it's actually about, no, I want to get my way. Look at the talent pool of women on the Labour right. Okay?
They should have gone with Emily Thornberry in 2020.
Who would you say as a viable leader of the Labour Party from the Labour right? Who would you say? Tell me. Again, maybe I'm being a misogynist. Who? Tell me. I can name a ton of women in the Labour Party who should be the leader or could be the leader. Emily Thornberry. I wouldn't put her on the Labour right to start with.
No, but they should have gone with her in 2020. Same politics as Keir Starmer, but actually with some charisma. But she didn't go anywhere, which was a shame. Well, I didn't back her at the time, but in retrospect was a shame. It would have been better if she got the job than Keir Starmer.
I can see the TikToks now. G&Ts with Emily.
Exactly.
The evening TikTok at 6 p.m. But look, it's even strange that they're saying this about Andy Burnham when the person who's basically driving his whole agenda is Louise Haigh, right?
And Annalise Midgley.
And Annalise Midgley is his chief whip. So given the Chancellor isn't actually that powerful, John Healey is basically just doing what he's told, right? Who's John Healey? John Healey is a factotum. He's doing what he's told by...
We don't know that yet, but it's a strong hypothesis.
John Healey is not a political heavyweight to be Chancellor of the Exchequer. He's being told what to think, in my view, by Jim O'Neill and by Andy Haldane and by Andy Burnham, okay? That's why he got the job. So one could argue that the two most powerful people in government after Andy Burnham are Louise Haigh and Annalise Midgley. They're the real power brokers. But that counts for nothing, right? That counts for nothing. And Andy Burnham is a brochurist because, Harriet Harman didn't get her way. And we saw the exact same thing. There's this really peculiar part of Labour right politics that's attached to this stuff. Andy Burnham became the PM, and the Labour Women's Network and Jess Phillips immediately start saying 50% of the cabinet have to be women. That's quite sensible, actually. Fine. 50% of the cabinet have to be women. I think 50% of the great officers of state have to be women, so it has to be 2 women, 2 men. And I think, well, what if I want 3 women? Is that discriminating against men? Which is quite plausible, of course. What are your thoughts on this, guys? Let's get something in the comments. Because often, I talk about this with female comrades all the time, women comrades all the time, and they say harsher things than I do. But maybe I'm out of touch.
So in the Equality Act, right, Section 158 permits positive action generally where a group faces disadvantage or disproportionately low participation, provided it's proportionate. So if
Michael, we just literally went through all of this.
But if you could argue that it was proportionate because there had been
but a political party is a private association. We've gone through all of this. I literally just spoke for about 3 minutes explaining all of this.
Well, we'll get fine. I'll take your version of it.
By the way, I think the Equality Act, a lot of it's crazy, a lot of it's good. And what's really ironic is that right-wingers keep using the Equality Act to get their way. So, for instance, a teacher might be sacked for saying something which is in keeping with his Christian faith. He might be a real hardcore, zealot, and I mean that in the religious sense. And he'll get sacked. And the exact same people who, I hate the Farage of the world, I hate the Equality Act, they'll defend this chap, and he'll get a big payout because of the Equality Act.
There's nothing wrong with saying you're against something but then using it.
No, but my point is, I don't think it's particularly well formulated legislation, but I think it's better than not having it. Put it that way.
I think some of the rulings about equal work for equal pay are a bit weird.
Agreed. I think ultimately pay should be done. Pay deals and pay disputes should be done through sectoral bargaining and trade unions. I think having judges decide this stuff is quite dangerous.
And having judges, so the weird one was Next, wasn't it? So they had that Next were paying their warehouse staff more than their front of house staff.
Yeah.
And the warehouse staff was slightly more male than the front of house staff, which was slightly more female. And a judge decided that these were equal jobs. And so therefore Next was doing wage discrimination between the sexes. But Next literally said, we've offered everyone front of house a job in the warehouse and they don't want to take it because it's somewhat unpleasant. And we have to pay more to the warehouse people because the market rates for warehouse workers is more than the market rates for people who work in shops. And they still sort of sued them loads of money. And it's one of the reasons why Birmingham went bankrupt. One of the reasons, not the only reason.
Well, Birmingham didn't actually go bankrupt, but that's a story for another day. We have one more comment to read out. When I was a Labour member and we were voting for a new leader, I stood up. This is from Christopher Fox, 735. I stood up and said, we needed a woman as a leader. A woman of the CLP said to me, now is not the time for a woman. They voted for Starmer. I do remember one Guardian article with Starmer saying, Keir Starmer is the feminist choice. It was, if you want a woman to be the next Prime Minister, vote for Keir Starmer or something crazy. Only the Guardian can say this stuff. Michael, it's been a pleasure.
Yeah, pleasure.
We've been on for 70 minutes, only did 3 stories. I'm pretty sure the aliens came and took me away. I'll have to rewatch this just to make sure. And thanks, of course, to all of you for tuning in. Come back tomorrow for another live stream from 6 p.m. For now, you've been watching Novara Media. Good night.